Hey everyone, and welcome back to ShazMaths. In the last video where we discussed factorization, we did the factorization of two terms and we learned a few steps that we will always apply whenever we have to factorize an expression. Now also in the last video we discussed the importance of factorization and why we actually need to factorize the expression. So if you have not watched the last video, I will strongly suggest you guys to watch that video just so that you do have the idea of what are the steps involved and what is the importance of factorization. In today's video, we will be learning on how to factorize whenever 3 terms or 4 terms are involved, and we will be doing a few examples as well just so that we do know how to apply those steps in the exam questions. So let's jump onto it straight away. So these are the steps that we discussed, that what actually we do need to do whenever we have to factorize an expression. Alright, so the first step is always to take out the common term, and then the second step, that is you apply the identity a square minus b square equals to a plus b times a minus b, and this step was discussed in detail in the last video, so I'm not gonna be wasting any more time on this one. Let's jump on to the third step, that was middle term break. Now the third step is we haven't discussed it in the last video, but we do know that this is only applicable in case of 3 terms. Alright, so whenever 3 terms are involved, we will first look out for the common term and then we will jump on to the step number 3. We will basically skip step number 2. Alright, now whenever 3 terms are involved, we will take out the common term, we will then apply the middle term break method. But then for the middle term break method, there are a few steps that we have to follow. Now what are those steps? The first one is we will always arrange the expression in the descending power of the variable involved. Right now I have just written down in the descending power of x, but whatsoever the variable is involved, we will always arrange the expression first in the descending power of that variable. The second step is we will multiply the third term with the first term and write it down in our rough work. Now this might seem a bit confusing, but when we will apply these steps into the actual example, it will make a lot of more sense to you. So I will suggest you to write down these steps, alright, so that when we are applying them in the example, it makes a lot of sense to you. Okay, the third step would be we'll make 2 factors of the term obtained such that we add or subtract these factors in order to get the middle term, and then we will replace them by the middle term as well. And the last step is we will make pairs and the factorization is done. Now let's have a look at how would we actually apply these steps in the example, in the exam question, just so that we do have an idea on how to solve the question. All right, now let's move on. Here you go. So the question says factorize the following, and the expression is x squared plus 5x plus 6. Now the very first thing when I saw this question was I noticed that okay, there are 3 terms involved. The first step should be I will arrange these 3 terms in the descending power of x. That means x squared should be the first term, then there should be a term containing x, and then the last term should not contain any x or any variable. So this question is already arranged in the descending power of x. Let's jump on to the next step. I'll look on these 3 terms that if there is anything common in these 3 terms, which there is no as such term common in all of these 3 terms. So that's why I arranged the terms in the descending power of x. That is already done. Next step was you'll multiply the third term with the first term, okay, and write it down in your rough work. So that's what I'm gonna do. I multiplied the third term, that is plus 6. Now make sure you always consider the sign as well. Please do not ignore the sign of the term. All right, so plus 6 will be multiplied with plus x square, and I will get plus 6x square as a result. Okay, now the next step was you will think about the factors of this term obtained, So you will think about the factors of this term obtained such that you add or subtract those two factors in order to get the middle term. Now, please pay attention. How would you know that you need to add those factors or you need to subtract those factors? This sign over here will basically tell us if we need to add the factors or subtract the factors. If this sign was negative, I would have said that I need the factors of 6 such that I subtract those two factors in order to get the middle term. But right now, this factor is plus 6x squared. That means I need factors of 6x squared such that I add those two factors in order to get the middle term. Okay, now the next step is I will think about the factors of 6x squared, and whenever I say factors of 6x squared, that means in simpler terms I will think about two numbers or two terms that I would multiply them in order to get 6x squared. So let's start off. The very first two factors of 6x squared would be 1x and 6x, because if I multiply them, 1 times 6 would be 6, right? Now if I add these two factors, I will get 7x as a result. But what I actually do need, I need 5x. That means these factors are not the ones that I need. Let's jump on to the next one. So 1 times 6 is 6, 2 times 3 is 6 as well. That means those will be the next two factors. Now let's see if they satisfy the second condition or not. So 2x times 3x would definitely result in 6x squared, and if I add these two factors, I will get 5x. So that means these should be the factors. But the next thing I need to think about is what should be the sign of these two factors. Now always remember, because it is positive over here, that means I need two factors such that I add those two factors in order to get the middle term. Now addition is only possible whenever both of the factors have negative sign or both of the factors have positive sign. Okay, now how I would know that either negative sign should be here or positive sign should be here? It will always depend on the middle term. Now because the middle term over here has the positive sign, that means I will actually pick up the positive sign of both of these factors. Okay, so that means I got my factors that are plus 2x and plus 3x. Now it does not matter even if you write plus 3x at the first and then 2x after that, it won't matter. All right, so the step was you will think about the factors of this number such that you add subtract them in order to get the middle term, and then you will replace the middle term by those two factors. So this is what I am about to apply now. So it would be x squared. I'm gonna replace 5x by these two factors, that is plus 2x and plus 3x. So plus 3x plus 2x plus 6. So what I've done is I've just broken down the middle term. That's why the method itself says middle term break. Okay, and the last step was you will make the pairs. Now how would I make the pairs? Basically I have to take common in the first two terms, and then I have to take a common term in the next two terms. This is how I will make the pairs. Okay, let's have a look. So in the first two terms I can see x is common, and what I will be left inside the bracket, it would be x plus 3, and then in the next two terms it is plus 2 as common, and I will be left with x plus 3 again. And then the final step would be you will write down these two expressions as ones, and then the rest of the terms in one bracket. So it would be x plus 3 times x plus 2. I'm going to write it as x plus 2 times x plus 3. There you go. So this expression is fully factorized. Now I want you guys to focus on one more important thing over here. That is why we are actually doing this thing. Now remember, factorization is the reverse process of expansion. Okay, now have a look here. If we are going from this step to this step, if we are expanding the expressions, what you would actually do, you will multiply this x with both of these terms. That means x times x plus 3, and then you will multiply plus 2 with both of these terms. That would be plus 2 times x plus 3. Have a look here. This is what is being done in this step, right? So that is why when we are going from this step to this step, we should always focus on that the terms inside the bracket should be the same. Okay, just so that we can write them down as one expression, and then the rest of the two terms as one expression. Okay, so these are bits and pieces, or I would say just a few things that we always have to keep in mind whenever we are factorizing the expression, and especially whenever we are factorizing an expression that contains 3 terms. Okay, let's apply the same steps and do a few more examples of factorization of 3 terms. So in this second example again, that says we have to factorize 3x squared minus 18x minus 21. So the very first step should be, we will take out the common term, and then we will see if the terms are arranged in descending power of x. Okay, so I can see in all of these 3 terms, I can take 3 as common, and I will be left with x squared minus 6x minus 7 inside the bracket. Alright, now the next step was, because the terms are already arranged in the descending power of x, I will make a rough work column for myself, and then I will multiply the third term with the first term, and I will write it down just in my rough work. Now the very most common mistake is, what students do is they multiply the third term with the first term, and then they write it down instead of the first term as well over here. We cannot do that. We are just writing the resultant term obtained in the rough work. Okay, so negative 7 times x squared would be negative 7x squared. Next step was, we will think about factors of this term such that we subtract those 2 factors in order to get the middle term. Got it? Now why I've said that we need to subtract those 2 factors? Because this sign is negative right now. Okay, so yeah, be very mindful of that. So let's think about factors of 7x squared, sorry. The very first 2 factors will be 1x and 7x. Now if I subtract 7 and 1, I will get 6, and what I actually do need, I need 6 as well. That means these are the correct factors, and we need to subtract these 2 factors, and subtraction is only possible whenever one term contains positive sign and the other one contains negative sign. That means either this will contain positive and this will contain negative, or the other way around. Now how would you determine which term should contain positive and which term should contain the negative sign? It will always be dependent again on the middle term. The middle term has negative sign. That means the bigger term should contain the negative sign. Okay, so that means the other term will contain the positive sign. So these 2 are the correct factors. And if you remember the step, it was, you will multiply the third term with the first term, write down the resultant term obtained, make the factors of the resultant term obtained such that you subtract those 2 factors in order to get the middle term, and then you replace those 2 factors with the middle term. So that's what I'm gonna do. So it would be 3 times x squared minus 7x plus x minus 7. So the next step would be you'll make the pairs. So it's going to be 3 times x minus 7. Now remember, our goal was that the terms inside this bracket should be same. Okay, just so that we can write them down as ones and rest of the two terms as ones in another bracket. So x times x minus 7, and there is nothing in common in x and minus 7, right? So I'm just gonna say plus 1. I'll just take plus 1 as common times x minus 7, because when I've taken plus 1 as common, the terms inside the bracket would not change. Alright, because x divided by 1 would result in x, and 7 divided by 1 will result in 7. And whenever you will take positive as common, the signs inside the bracket always remains the same. So that's why, have a look here, it was positive x before taking out anything as common, and over here, even after taking it as common, plus 1 as common, it's still positive x, and this was negative 7 and it's still negative 7. Okay, so that's why I have taken positive 1 as common. I'm going to close the bracket. So the last step was, you will write down these two expressions as ones. So it's going to be x minus 7 times, and the other two terms, that is x plus 1, as ones inside the bracket. So this is the fully factorized form of this expression. Okay, let's do the third example as well. Now in this third example, again the very first step was you'll take out the common term. Now this is the most ignored part, I would say, in the students, that they do not look for the common term and they just jump onto the third step, that is the middle term break. So do not do this mistake, please, and always follow the steps. First step should be, you'll take out the common term. So what is common in these three terms? I'm going to think about the sign first, then the coefficient, and then the variable. Okay, so when I'm talking about the coefficient, it says 2, 10 and 48. Maximum number that is divisible by all of these numbers is 2. And then about the variable, I can see all of these have x, so I'm going to take x as common. And regarding the power of x, if you remember in the last video we discussed, it should be the maximum power of x that is common in all of these terms. So the maximum power that all of these three terms have is 1. Okay, so even if I write down x to the power 1, or even if I do not write it down, it's going to be meaning the same thing. Okay, so I've taken 2x as common. Because this first term do not have y, so y will not be common in all of these three terms. So inside the bracket, I'll be left with x square plus 5 xy minus 24 y square. Alright, now the next step, it was you'll multiply the third term with the first term and write it down in your rough work. So in my rough work, I'm going to multiply the third term with the first term, and that is negative 24y square times plus x square. So it would be negative 24 x square y square. So I will think about two factors such that I subtract those two factors in order to get the middle term. Okay, so let's think about the factors of 24. So that would be either 1 and 24. So 24xy and 1xy. If I subtract them, I'm gonna get 23xy, which is not the middle term. I need plus 5xy, right? So let's move on. Then it would be 2 and 12. Again, if I subtract these two, I'm gonna get 10xy. So these are not the factors. The next factors are 3 and 8. So 8xy and 3xy. So if I subtract these two, I basically get 5xy. and I need 5xy as well. That means these are the correct factors. Next thing was, you will think about the sign of these two factors. Okay, so because we have to subtract the two factors, one term would contain positive sign, second one would contain the negative sign, and the sign of the middle term will always be with the bigger term. Okay, so this will contain positive and this will contain the negative. So let's replace these two factors with the middle term now. So it's going to be 2x times x squared plus 8xy minus 3xy minus 24y squared. Okay, and the last step was, in fact, the second last step, I would say, you will make the pairs. So I'm going to take x as common in the first two terms, and it would be x plus 8y, and then in the next two terms I'm going to take negative 3y as common, so it's going to be x plus 8y, and let's close the bracket. Now pay attention to this step. What I've done over here is I can see that the maximum number that is divisible by both of these numbers, 3 and 24, was 3. So I've taken 3 as common, and in the variable, the maximum power of the variable that both of these expressions or both of these terms had was y to the power of 1. But why I have taken negative as common is because if you remember, our goal is to make this expression same on both the sides, right? Now, if in case I would have taken positive 3y as common, the signs inside the bracket would not have changed, right? So I would have gotten negative x negative 8y, which is wrong. I mean, I cannot say that this is wrong, but we do not need this expression, right? We need x plus 8y just so that we can write those expressions as ones. Okay, so that is why I have taken negative 3y as common, because whenever you will take negative as common in two or more than two terms, the signs inside the bracket will always change. Okay, I want you to remember this thing. Whenever you'll take negative as common, the signs inside the bracket will change. So that is why I've taken negative 3y as common, and if you observe over here, it was negative 3xy, but then when I have taken negative as common, it became positive x. Okay, similarly, the second term was negative as well, but because I have taken negative as common, it became positive. So that's what I want you guys to focus on, that whenever you will take negative as common, the signs inside the bracket will change. Okay, now because we already have these two expressions as same, so I'm gonna write them down as ones. So x plus 8y times, and write down the rest of the two terms once in the bracket. So it's going to be x minus 3y, and close the bracket. So this will be the final form, I would say factorized form of this expression.